Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining us for this Greater Manchester briefing, reconvened after the election period. We've had a meeting today of the Greater Manchester COVID Emergency Committee, a full meeting, a full 2 hours. Everybody really getting on top of the current picture. Very much wanted to get our eye very firmly back on the ball in terms of what's happening in Greater Manchester, and I'll take you through those slides now to show you the current picture. So if we could have the first slide, please, colleagues. So the best way, I guess, to summarise this is a broadly positive picture across the city region, but with one particular cause for concern. Which, as you can see in the slide, is Bolton, where there has been a significant increase in the all-age positivity rate over the last week. If you look across Greater Manchester, the rest, so 4 other boroughs are showing a much smaller increase, a slight increase. Those being Manchester, Rochdale, Stockport and Wigan. So 5 overall an increase and 5 a slight decrease. So it's a mixed picture, broadly positive with regard to 9, but obviously very significant change in Bolton in the last fortnight. Linked, we think, to international travel, so people coming in to the area from abroad, particularly India. And though that not being the whole story, because there is also evidence of community transmission. So that's the latest picture. As I say, it is broadly positive. But of course, we obviously can see what's happening in Bolton, and that obviously presents concerns for other boroughs in Greater Manchester, but indeed for the Northwest as a whole. And the picture here is not unique to us. I think there is something similar happening in other parts of the Northwest. So can I have the next slide, please, if we could move on. And this is a slide which I think Sir Richard Lees has been pointing you towards in the last few weeks. I think it's a really important slide because obviously this draws out the effectiveness of the vaccination programme. And if you look at that headline rate in the over 60s across Greater Manchester, we can see that it's down slightly on the previous week and quite low. Again, obviously Bolton showing an increase, significant, but in every other borough, very small increases or mainly decreases. That suggests that the vaccine is proving effective, and even in Bolton, obviously the increase is not as perhaps big as people might expect. So obviously something that we are keeping a very close eye on, but that's the picture in the over 60s, which is more encouraging. And I think this will now be reinforced by the next slide. Now this tells a very clear story, doesn't it? Because you've got the whole Greater Manchester picture there with regard to the age breakdown with regard to new cases, and you can see very clearly that it is within the working age, younger people and the working age population in Bolton. If you look at the very top line, over 65s, you will see that there isn't a darkening there. So it is in those younger age groups, 16 to 44, or a little bit beyond into the people in their 50s, but not in the over 65. So that's the picture with regards to the age breakdown. If we carry on, please. This is much more encouraging in terms of care homes and the numbers of people affected. We calculate that this relates to 32 people out of a care home population of around 15,000 people. Now, of course, a matter of concern for those people and their families but much lower than it's been at any point really in the last year, and that again we believe demonstrates the success of the vaccination programme, amongst other measures. If we could move on to the hospital position, and here's a couple of warning signs, I guess. If you look at the number of weekly admissions, up significantly, also an increase in those catching the virus within the hospital environment. Much lower though than the numbers that obviously we've seen a few weeks even ago. So although we've seen a slight increase this week, still much lower. And in terms of critical care and intensive care, I think that's the lowest figure for a long time. 18 patients in critical care across Greater Manchester. But obviously, we will be keeping a close eye on the situation with regard to admissions. And if I move finally to the vaccination slide, thank you. Again, this is great progress across Greater Manchester. The speed of the programme has stalled a little with regard to vaccine supply in the last month or so, and there's been a particular focus on second doses. But again, overall, this is a very healthy picture, and really a great tribute to colleagues in the NHS, volunteers, and others who've been involved. So, if I may, I'll just finish on the health slides with a couple of thoughts that come from everything that we've just presented to you. The first is that obviously with the roadmap decision yesterday that the Prime Minister has announced, we are on that course, and the way obviously to mitigate some of the risks that we have is to accelerate vaccination, particularly in the communities most affected by the Indian variant, and it is the Indian variant that's largely responsible for the increase that we're seeing in Bolton. So in response to that, I can report to you today that Greater Manchester has submitted for consideration to the Joint Council on Vaccination and Immunisation a request that we have permission to vaccinate all over 16s in Bolton and actually more widely in Greater Manchester, so that we can move more quickly beyond the age progression. That being a really important thing that might be able to mitigate the risks of spread in those communities where we are seeing more transmission. So that request has gone in. We understand it is being considered by JCVI. I believe other authorities elsewhere in the northwest and around the country have made a similar request, that they have freedom to go more quickly down the age range, and also then have the vaccine supplies to support that. You might remember, for colleagues who've regularly tuned into this call, we have been saying for some time that there should be a provision to surge vaccine supplies into the areas where the case rates have been highest throughout, and where historically there are the greatest health inequalities. And in many ways we are repeating that request, but with a renewed urgency, given the effect of what we're seeing in Bolton. And I guess then that will bring me to my final point, which we discussed at the committee this morning. And I think where we are is that obviously, while we support the roadmap as it's been set out by the Prime Minister, I think we do have to give a more cautious message than perhaps the one that is currently being given nationally, which is that we would just ask people to take note of the position that we're in Greater Manchester. There is clearly a sign of a change on the ground from where we've been in recent weeks. Okay, it's in one borough at the moment, but there is obviously a concern that could spread. The way I might summarise it is that we're asking people to take notice of that, and perhaps not, move fully to take advantage of all the freedoms that will be made available next week, to continue to proceed carefully and to be aware of the situation within your community. We do have Eid approaching. We of course have the unlocking approaching. So we would just ask all of our residents to be conscious of the situation locally in your area, and as I say, perhaps not to take full advantage of all of the freedoms on offer, to continue to act with caution, and that I think is the Greater Manchester position for now. So I will leave that there, and if I might just say a word or two about the Queen's speech, obviously, that has been given in Parliament by Her Majesty earlier today. There are some measures within the Queen's speech that we very much welcome. One being the introduction of the high-speed rail bill dealing with the Crewe to Manchester leg of HS2. I would just say on that we have not moved from our very firm position that the right solution for Manchester Piccadilly is an underground option at Manchester Piccadilly. At present, the bill in some ways allows for both a surface option, which is the government's preferred option, and the underground option to be considered, and there is work ongoing at the moment to compare both of those options. But we would just want to say again that what we've seen in central Manchester over the last couple of years is that there is too much congestion from a rail point of view on the surface of city centre Manchester, and that has caused the ongoing problems with timetabling that affects the wider north of England. Let's not make the same mistake. We need to separate these services from services on the surface, create an underground option, which we believe will be a much better solution, and a solution for a century or more, as opposed to the surface option. So while we welcome the bill in the Queen's speech, we continue to have a very firm view that an underground option for HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail at Piccadilly is the right solution. More broadly, though, we see that the government is claiming that this is a Queen's speech to level up. I don't see evidence within the Queen's speech, and I would include the HS2 bill in this, that any of these bills will level up the country within a decade. I'm struggling to see which bills will do that. By contrast, yesterday, we presented a plan for a London-style public transport system in Greater Manchester, the B network, which I believe is actually the most credible and comprehensive plan yet seen to level up a whole city region and to support the 3 million people who live within it. That anyone has presented, including the government. So my message today is to ask the government to get behind it, to help us deliver it and make levelling up real, and make it real within a decade in a way that I don't believe any other bills in the Queen's speech will do. Just to go through a couple of the other measures, if I might, within the Queen's speech. We have concerns about the lack of a legislative measure in the Queen's speech to prevent what are called Section 21 evictions, or no-fault evictions. We know that the evictions ban is due to come to an end again at the end of this month. We also know there's been a very big increase in people in rent arrears during the last 12 months. As I understand it, the proposal at the moment is to bring forward a white paper on the private rented sector. Well, actually, the government has been saying it will legislate to reform no-fault evictions for many years now, and I don't see why it needs a white paper. And of course, the risk is immediate with the lifting of the evictions ban and so many people being in rent arrears. And we believe that's a problem, and believe more urgent action is needed. On planning more broadly, and the government proposing measures to increase, to modernise the planning system so more homes can be built, it is it seems to me in contradiction to messages given out by Conservatives at the local elections around protecting the green belt, because I don't see how a bill that is going to loosen planning law will in fact achieve that. I don't think it will achieve that. I think it will do the opposite. I think it will put the green belt at risk, and we would ask them to think very carefully before going ahead with reforms in that direction. On the measures to reform elections, we have serious concerns about the requirement to introduce photo ID at elections. We believe that will have serious implications for turnout, and do not believe that measure is justified given the relatively low levels of electoral fraud. Equally, I do not support the move to return to first past the post for mayoral elections in the UK. I think it's a backward step when there are more parties standing at elections. It enhances the choice of the public. If there is confusion about the ballot paper, well, maybe that should be explained by better education. And in fact, we would say here that there isn't much evidence of that. The figures that have been given to me with regard to ballot papers in the Greater Manchester mayoral election that were wrongly completed and therefore invalidated was overall just over 11,000, which is less than 2% of all ballots cast, 1.6% to be precise. So it seems odd to take away people's choice, an element of people's choice at an election, to fix what we would say is a very relatively small problem, I should say. And then you just finally look at some of the things that are missing from the Queen's speech. As others have pointed out, no firm promise of legislation to reform the financing of social care, and a vague commitment to proposals being brought forward. That sounds like a green paper to me. Well, I introduced a green paper on social care over a decade ago now, and it doesn't seem that we are moving forward with anything like the required pace on social care, and I think there'll be widespread disappointment about that. And another gap with regard to football reform. Obviously, we've had the Prime Minister expressing a newfound interest in reforming football in recent weeks, which I welcome, but it suddenly seems to have died away again. And I think it's disappointing that there isn't a commitment here to bring forward a bill to support the conclusions of the fan-led review, which is being brought forward by Tracy Crouch. Disappointing too that while we have commitments to protect workers' rights, no clear commitment to end the practice of fire and rehire, which we've seen used to unfair effect in Greater Manchester in recent weeks in the bus industry, in the utility industry, and that's something that is an ongoing concern to us as we seek to go in the opposite direction and improve employment standards coming out of the pandemic. There's probably more I could say on the Queen's speech. I think overall I would say it's underwhelming. It seems a fairly thin package of measures. I don't see how this puts sort of rocket boosters behind levelling up, as I think it was promised. And in that scenario, I would say to the Prime Minister, get behind our plan for the B network, because that absolutely will level up Greater Manchester with London. It's a ready-made plan. It's there to go. It's credible. And with your support, we can make it happen more quickly. So I'm going to leave it there, conscious that I've thrown a lot at you all in the last 20 minutes or so. I'm going to hand over to Jimmy, who's going to take me and everybody through your questions. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Jimmy.
Thank you, Andy. We have quite a few questions on the situation as regards the infection rate in Bolton. The first two, Andy, one from Katie at That's Manchester and then Rowan Bridge at BBC News. Katie asks, what can be done to ensure that the situation in Bolton does not worsen as more restrictions are set to ease further from Monday? And off the back of that, Rowan asks, are you concerned, Andy, that the problem will significantly worsen when lockdown restrictions ease? Do you think measures should be more strict in the Bolton postcodes to try to prevent a spread? And are you worried that cases will spread from Bolton across the whole of GM as cases worsen?
Okay, thanks, Katie. I'm just trying to find your question.
So Katie at 222 and Rowan at 228.
Okay, so bear with me, colleagues. I've got my. I got you. Okay, so Katie, there is a lot being done to make sure that the situation in Bolton is gripped and as best as we can does not worsen, certainly ahead of any further easing. So there has been an enhanced contact tracing operation underway, obviously surge testing taking place, PCR testing, and there has been a mobile vaccination centre in operation around Bolton. So everything that you would expect to be done is being done, and I want to pay tribute to leader of Bolton Council and all of his team, and we've all expressed support today in terms of anything we can do to support the situation there. I think one thing that can be done extra that I have tried to do today is just on messaging. We do need to just clock the fact that we're in a slightly different position again to other parts of the country. That doesn't mean we're abandoning the roadmap, of course not, but it is about saying just think about how you're going to approach what's coming in the next few days with a degree more caution than perhaps otherwise you would have done. We do have Eid approaching, and we would obviously say to the Muslim community in Bolton to, again, look at the figures and just be very mindful of that as we go through those celebrations. So that's the message from here today. It's not a message that is contradicting the national message. It's just saying that, here in Greater Manchester, not for the first time, we have to approach things with more caution, and we're saying, perhaps do not fully use all of your freedoms as they're being presented to you. And the second bit, Jimmy, was?
The second was from Rowan Bridge at 228. Are you concerned the problem will significantly worsen when restrictions ease? Do you think the measures should be more strict in the Bolton postcodes to try to prevent a spread? And are you worried that cases could spread from Bolton across Greater Manchester?
So, of course, we are watching the situation carefully, Rowan, but I think the first thing I need to say is we're in a different world now to the one we were in last year, let's say last autumn, when we were seeing, a flickering of cases following the first national lockdown, and that is the vaccination programme. Obviously, is the big change. And as I've said to you today, there is evidence that the vaccination programme is protecting people, particularly older people. And the report from Bolton today was that there hasn't been a significant increase in hospital admissions to date. So in terms of the concern about pressure on hospitals, obviously that is a very different picture. And the numbers I've presented to you today in terms of the numbers of people in hospital are much, much lower than anything we were seeing late last year or indeed early this year. Now, I think that the key thing is to say there isn't complacency. It's not about being worried that cases will spread. It's just about being not complacent that they will spread. We are better, I think, as a city region in terms of how we have reformed contact tracing. And I think when contact tracing is dealing with smaller numbers of cases in more localized situations, it is better able to work. But it has been flagged with me this morning. Our lead director of public health has said again that the question of self-isolation support is again coming to the fore. There is a concern that some people at risk do not have all of the support they need to be able to take the time off work, and some evidence that people have been symptomatic in the workplace. How many times do we have to say this? This issue has to be properly fixed. It is a chink in our armour. Said that many times, but I'm going to say it again. We've got pilots going on around the country. I think the time for pilots is over. They need to have clear firm proposals in place to support people who need to self-isolate. And I think that message, again, needs to be given out at this press briefing today. And that is one that the government has to fix.
Thank you, Andy. Two further questions on Bolton. This is from Michael Gaffney at 2:33 from Heart and Smooth, and Seamus McDonnell at 2:43. Seamus asks, Andy, do you know what is driving this increase in cases specifically among young people in Bolton? Are you, for example, concerned that students won't have to wear masks in schools from next week? And Michael also asks, could you tell us, Andy, about how the vaccine rollout is going in Bolton compared to other boroughs?
Okay, so Seamus, on your question, we think people returning from abroad, from India, from Pakistan, from other places in the subcontinent, may have originally brought the Indian variant back, but it's not the only explanation, and there is evidence of community transmission amongst older people as well. So that appears to be the explanation, and obviously we are continuing to watch things very closely. There is an issue about how quickly we can identify this variant, and that is creating a slight lag in the data, and that needs to be looked at. We have discussed this issue actually about schools, and there is local flexibility to ask schools to maintain enhanced measures should that be needed. So the committee has discussed that issue this morning, and the position is that it's not the case that there is just complete blanket rules in schools. If there is a need to maintain enhanced rules for a longer period of time, then that will be done through directors of public health talking to head teachers. In terms of the vaccine uptake, it's going well in Bolton as it's going everywhere in Greater Manchester. But there is this call from Greater Manchester to get down the age range that bit more quickly, and that's the call that's gone into JCVI. We understand that it is being considered, and that we may have an answer fairly shortly. So it's not that we are concerned about how the vaccination programme has gone. It's just that we think there is a case to move more quickly down the age range to enhance the level of protection to the community.
Thank you, Andy. I think two final questions on Bolton and connected issues. One is from James Much at the Bolton News at 2:21, and then Lauren at the Eastern Eye at 2:23. James asks, why, Andy, has Bolton's COVID infection rate consistently been one of the highest in the country? And perhaps prejudging your answer slightly, Lauren asks, during your second term as mayor, how do you plan to address the health inequalities caused by COVID-19 within the BAME communities?
Yeah, I don't know if it has consistently been one of the highest, James. It's fluctuated. So it has been high at some points, but it has also been down quite low at other points. It obviously has a proximity to East Lancashire, where cases have also been high in the Blackburn, Burnley area. So it's the fundamentals, isn't it, that we've all often spoken about, the nature of people's work and the lack of ability to self-isolate if needed to do so. That remains a particular problem. I think Bolton has fluctuated, as a number of our boroughs have fluctuated. So it's lack of provision to self-isolate, linked to sometimes housing where there is a lot of overcrowding within housing, so lack of space to self-isolate. So it's a reflection of deprivation, and it's often seen across the rest of the north. So I don't think there is anything here that says it's happening in Bolton at the moment, but I don't think there's anything to say that Bolton has a completely unique set of circumstances that our other 9 boroughs don't have. That's not the case. In terms of addressing the health inequalities at Lauren, well, we did have an independent inequalities commission look at all of these issues last year. It very much is about good work, secure work for everybody, where people have the cover of occupational sick pay. It is about good housing that obviously gives people the space that they need. Those are the fundamentals that will address health inequalities across Greater Manchester, and they very much were the priorities that I set out in my manifesto and on Saturday. And tomorrow we will set out a big move around the living wage in Greater Manchester to kind of move towards a much more proactive approach to improving conditions for our residents, linking all public procurement to the Good Employment Charter. We believe improving the quality of work from the bottom up is the right way to respond to a pandemic which has exposed the risk to people's health from the insecurity of their employment. So expect to find out more about that tomorrow.
Thank you, Andy. A couple of questions now on the Queen's speech. Kevin Fitzpatrick at Radio Manchester at 2:48 and Ella Griffith from Sky News also at 2:48. Kevin's also asked a question about Bury FC, but we might come to that in a second. Kevin asks, how do you, Andy, see the proposed planning changes in the speech today affecting the housing development plans and the green belt of Greater Manchester? And Ella Griffith.
If I take them one by one, Jim, because sometimes it's quite hard to remember them. So if you don't mind, I will just take Kevin's question there. I'm concerned about it, Kevin, and we'll have to look at the detail. And I know it'll be local authority colleagues who particularly will have to deal with this. But yeah, we do have mixed messaging from the Conservative Party. We've just had an election where Conservative candidate after Conservative candidate has stood for election saying that they will protect the green belt. And then in the first Queen's speech coming out of the election, we have proposals that appear to make it much easier for developers to build and weaken the protections that local authorities have got for their green spaces and for their communities. So we'll have to look at the detail, but it does appear to me to be contradictory. And that's certainly my experience of living through these issues over the last year, running through this election campaign. The Conservatives are saying one thing at a local level and a different thing at the national level.
Thank you, Andy. And then Ella Griffith from Sky News at 2:48. She asks, Boris Johnson has described new legislation aimed at reforming education for older teenagers and adults as, quote, rocket fuel for levelling up. Is rocket fuel what levelling up needs?
Yes, it definitely is, Ella. And I'm not against these proposals. They sound sensible to me, the proposals on skills and lifelong learning. But I think the government is going to be hard pressed as describing that alone puts rocket fuel on levelling up. I mean, it's much needed, the reform of skills and adult education. I would absolutely agree with that, but that alone does not level up the country. Here we do have to train thousands of people actually in green construction skills if we're going to retrofit properties. So yes, we need reform of the skills system. What worries me about this Queen's speech is I in the context of England, I didn't see one mention of the word devolution, not one mention. And that's odd, given we've just come through an election where mayors across the country got a strong mandate, where the public are clearly saying that they like devolution. They're responding to it. And, you know, if the rocket fuel on levelling up needs to be applied at the bottom, if you like, to really get the change, you will not level up by pouring rocket fuel out to keep stretching this metaphor from Whitehall. There'll just be droplets of rocket fuel landing on the ground. It will work if it's done at the ground level. But I didn't see any mention of the word devolution, and that again is why I would call this Queen's speech underwhelming. I don't think it is a plan to level up. And that's why I come back to what I announced yesterday. That is a plan to level up. The B network is definitely a plan to level up. Because you could give people the skills, but if they can't afford the public transport to get to the job opportunities that there are, because they can't afford it or that it takes too long, then that's where your plan stalls. And this is why they've got to get behind us with this plan for a London-style integrated transport system. That is levelling up. That creates the conditions for a much more productive economy in Greater Manchester, where people can more easily access training and more easily access job opportunities. And I just would say to the government, it's in your interest and it's in our interest to work together on this. So why don't we get on and do it?
Thank you, Andy. So back to Kevin Fitzpatrick at 2:48, and actually Michael Gaffney at heart has the same question really at 2:51, which is, I'm sure you've seen the news about Gig Lane going up for sale today, Bury FC's former ground. Is there anything you and the JMCA can do to help the community groups access funds, or with a view to taking the stadium on?
Well, thank you. Is it just Kevin who's asking this question?
Kevin and Michael at 2:51 is beneath. It's effectively the same question about the announcement of Gig Lane.
Thanks to you both. I think this is an opportunity, isn't it, to move quickly and to see if we can secure Gig Lane for the Bury people, the Bury community, as a place where a Bury football club in a sort of reborn condition can play football, and that's what I think we all want to achieve. So I have had meetings with the leader of Bury Council, chief executive of Bury Council, local MPs. This is being done on a cross-party basis. I do know that contact has been made with the government, as you indicate, Kevin, in your question. I think the issue now is to quickly get our heads together to see what we can do to move quickly to see if we can secure Gig Lane for that football use. And obviously, you do make the link with the planning changes. Well, that might weaken the ability of Bury Council to protect Gig Lane. So that's why I say we're going to have to look at the detail of those planning changes. They may be relevant here. But the commitment I'll give you today to you both is, Kevin and Michael, is that I have been in touch, my office has been in touch with the leader of Bury Council today when we were made aware of this news. We are prepared to move quickly to see if we can help. I definitely want to help colleagues in Bury, and this is a piece of football heritage that matters to many more people in Greater Manchester, to see if we can secure it so that the club can start to rebuild and play football again at Gig Lane. So can't probably go into further details than that just now, but certainly this could be a risk in one way, but let's see if we can turn it into an opportunity.
Thank you, Andy. You mentioned public transport earlier, and so this is a question from Niall Griffiths at the MEN at 2:55. Niall asks, are there any firm plans for what a Middleton Metrolink line will look like, and have issues around how it will affect people's homes, Heaton Park, green space been considered? Some people also believe this is a quote distraction from transport solutions that would actually work for Middleton. What do you have to say to that?
Well, that's why we've asked TFGM to accelerate the consideration of the business case for it, Niall, to look at the precise options that we have for taking Metrolink to Middleton. I mean, obviously, all of the issues that you mentioned have to be carefully considered, as they have been carefully considered when Metrolink has been extended anywhere. All of the evidence, though, points to the beneficial impact that Metrolink has on local areas, on house prices, on a whole range of factors. And it's why I'm very keen to create a mayoral development corporation for Middleton, so that we can look at everything in the round, that we can link the B network as we build it to local regeneration, the regeneration of our towns. And we look at, if you like, one vision for places with transport extension as part of it. So that's the work that I've asked the team to do. We are expecting a devolved transport fund from the government to begin in the financial year 22-23, and we've been given some revenue funding this year to develop our capital plans. So This is exactly what the money is for, to look at all of the issues that you mentioned. I believe that we have to get more serious now about the north-south divide, and I'm not talking about the country's north-south divide. I'm talking about Greater Manchester's north-south divide. There is a need to focus on places like Middleton, where you can go to the town now and you can see derelict buildings looming over the town, but at the same time you can see the potential of the town. We've seen what's happened with Stockport and the Mayoral Development Corporation, and that has got Metrolink built into it, if you like. So the new interchange that we're about to build in Stockport will be Metrolink ready. And I want to take the same model and apply it to Middleton, and to kickstart the regeneration of the town, linking it very much to public transport, so that we're building new homes linked to public transport rather than always building for the car. So that's where we're up to with it. In terms of the firm plans, well, that's what I've asked to be brought forward. So that's what I've said now. I want to see the firm plans come forward, and as soon as we have the options, of course, we will share them with you, and we will have consultation with residents. We will be very careful about protection of green space, particularly an asset as important as Heaton Park.
Thank you, Andy. This is a question from James Much at the Bolton News at 2:55, who asks a police question. The GMP Federation has asked for your support to help with the recruitment of 200 unfilled detective roles and to launch a detective academy. Do you support the Federation's call for both of these requests? Yes,
I'm very sympathetic to what the Federation are saying, James. And indeed, we'd identified this issue earlier this year, working with the acting Chief Constable. You may have heard me say before that there was a concern that GMP did not have resources in the right places and was not managing demand as well as it might. And this issue particularly was brought to us by the acting chief, and action has already been taken on it to a degree. But I think the Federation are right, are saying more is needed. So what I will say to colleagues at the Greater Manchester Police Federation is, I will have a conversation with our new Chief Constable when he begins in office the week after next. This issue will very much be on the agenda, as will further strengthening neighbourhood policing, which is what Stephen Watson has already committed to do.
Thank you, Andy. So a couple of questions now on the election. The first is from Nigel Barlow at About Manchester at 2:58. Nigel asks, following the election results across the country last week, are you concerned that there could be a return to the politics of the 80s, which saw islands of opposition, such as in Liverpool and Manchester, fighting against the government of the day and leading to a decade of lost opportunities and investment?
I think we've already been living through the 80s. 2010 to 2020 felt a bit like the 1980s to me, Nigel. I'm hoping we're moving beyond that. But I think we're waiting, aren't we? We're waiting to find out what does levelling up mean. And this is an open question, I think, at the moment. I've talked before about funding being scattered out to favoured places and others frozen out. I am worried about that. Let me be really clear about that. I don't think that would be precisely the worst thing that could happen, in the, for political reasons, some areas are getting a lot of support and others are being just sort of left. That would create such, I think, sort of polarisation that we really don't need as a country right now. We need to come back together as a country. All areas, levelling up should be about everywhere. Being lifted. As I say, I believe we've put forward the most credible plan for levelling up yet, which is called the B Network, and it's there and it's waiting to be used. And the reason why it's not just about us and Greater Manchester, it becomes a template for the rest of the country. Keep coming back to this question: how can anyone justify the fact that public transport in this country is most expensive in some of our poorest communities? That is what is currently the situation. So how can people in those communities access the jobs and opportunities that are there when it is so expensive for them to travel? So I would say to the government start thinking about levelling up, not as when you kind of pick out isolated areas or favoured towns for one reason or another, but you work across Liverpool, Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire to create a transport system that costs the same to use as it costs in London. And that's the very clear test that I'm setting for levelling up. That point I made at the weekend about a single bus journey costing the same in Harperhay as it does in Haringey, and it's a direct test for the government, that and it's one I'm deliberately setting because I want to keep kind of making that a kind of clear test of whether we're levelled up or not. But there is a worry, and if we carry on with an approach to levelling up that remains very top down, that remains unequal in terms of who gets what, then I guess we could be going to see a very divisive political climate continue, and coming out of a pandemic, I think that would be a major mistake for any government to do.
Thank you, Andy. Sticking with the theme of the election, Susie Butter at the Evening Standard at 2:58 asks, how do you think the Labour Party can win back seats like Hartlepool, and what do you think of Keir Starmer's leadership and the reshuffle?
Well, on the second part of your question, Susie, first, I'm glad that the issues have been resolved, and there is obviously now a new shadow cabinet, if you like, with new responsibilities, and this is now a moment to move on and put forward a critique on the Queen's speech that's been presented today. It's not the time now to constantly kind of look backwards and look inwards. It's the time to look at what's been presented. And as I was saying before, there's plenty here that Labour needs to be pointing out, things that are missing, such as social care reform, things that are weak when it comes to levelling up. How can Labour win back seats like Hartlepool? I think it is in being bolder on things that really matter to people. So on social care, if I were the front bench now, I would be saying, make a really clear call as part of the health and care bill that's coming forward for a real living wage for everybody who works, as a minimum, for everybody who works in social care in the country. I think I don't believe there's people who vote for any political party who would oppose that. And it's actually by lifting the social care workforce to a level that the NHS workforce is at, that you can then seriously start to think of these two workforces as equals. And then the government's stated aim of integrating the two of them, as the bill is proposing to do, can become a reality. So I think Labour needs to get back on bread and butter issues, core priorities that have the backing of the British public. And I would say making sure that the social care workforce is lifted in terms of not just their pay, but also the support that they receive, the training that they receive, the standards of social care. That, I think, is where the party should be, alongside what I was just mentioning around transport in Hartlepool. Everything I exposed yesterday with regard to the fragmented and expensive nature of public transport in Greater Manchester is true and more in Hartlepool. In fact, I think we're better off than Hartlepool because we have a very modern tram system, which they don't have, and bus journeys can cost even more in places like Hartlepool because sometimes people are travelling at longer distances. Sometimes the services can be even more threadbare than they are in a place like Greater Manchester. So that, I would say, is the way to rebuild bread and butter issues with a bit of boldness about what you want to do and what you think is right, and coming forward with proper plans to level up Hartlepool, rather than some of the, let's say, more sloganising that we see sometimes from the government.
Thanks, Andy. That question was from Susie at the Evening Standard, and the last two questions are about the Evening Standard, in fact, and the first is Emily Ashton at Bloomberg, and she asks, can I ask about your decision, Andy, to become a columnist for London's Evening Standard newspaper? What's the thinking behind it? Is it about reaching out to the people of London or those in City Hall or Westminster? And what do you say to those thinking that this says something about your ambitions to get back to national politics in the near future?
It's certainly not the latter, Emily. It's more the former. So I was asked to do it. I didn't pitch it to them. It was, I think, born out of a wish for the standard to be kind of hearing voices more from the rest of the country, not just London talking to itself, but London, engaging with the perspective elsewhere. And I think that's a positive thing, because we probably do have more in common sometimes than we acknowledge. But I do want people in London to know what it is like to travel on public transport here. I don't think it is widely understood. And if it was a bit more understood, I think maybe they might understand why we feel so passionately as we do. And obviously we would want London's support to get what they have got. And I think we would probably get it from the good people of London. So it's about reaching out. I'll be honest with you, I was surprised to get the request, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm somebody who believe it or not, I love London. I've spent a lot of time of my life there, but I just want what London has got here in Greater Manchester. And I want to recruit friends in London to say, well, you know what? Yeah, they should have some of what we've got, but also maybe London might benefit from some of what we've got here in Greater Manchester, and a bit more sharing across the different cities of the country. It seems a good time, as I was saying before, not to polarise and everybody to sort of shout at each other, but actually a good opportunity to start understanding each other's perspective a bit more. So you asked for the thinking behind it. That's the thinking behind it, not just to have a kind of voice that's kind of seemingly pitched against them, but just one that is talking more directly to the people of London and seeing if we can work together to address issues that we all struggle with, such as the poor quality, the insecure work that we have in Greater Manchester and London, the need for better housing. So yeah, it's a good opportunity, but certainly no, it's to speak to the Londoners, if you like, as opposed to any wish to influence Westminster.
Thank you. And then the final question on this, and the last question of today, is from Maya Wolf-Robinson at The Guardian, who says that you've just been announced as the Evening Standard's star columnist, and should people of Greater Manchester worry that you're planning a move back down south?
God, I didn't know that they were saying anything on this today, and I should say it's unpaid, so there's no financial reason involved here. And no, I'm afraid for those of you who live in Greater Manchester, you're stuck with me for the full mayoral term, and hopefully more from my point of view. No, as I was saying before, it's about getting levelling up, getting more buy-in to levelling up, and particularly getting more buy-in to levelling up from London. I don't want London opposing levelling up in the rest of the country and seeing it as a threat to London. I don't think it is a threat to London. I think the threat to London is if London becomes so far ahead of the rest of the country, and therefore the resentment builds towards London. I don't think that's healthy in the long run. So this is about, as I say, a new conversation with not just my good friend Sadiq, but all of his residents, and finding common cause where we can. And no, I'm firmly planted in the Greater Manchester for a long time.
Thank you, Andy, and that's it for questions.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. We are going to keep these briefings going as we move forward. So thanks for your attendance, and we'll see you next time.